The period of Lord Richard Wellesley had established firmly the military ascendancy of East India Company over India. The challenge of the Mysorean state had been extinguished. The formidable Marathas had been humbled in Second Anglo-Maratha War, and the threat of the French had been minimized. After Lord Richard Wellesley's period, we will see that Lord Hastings will continue that trend ahead and try to bring most of the Indian powers under submission of East India Company. Today in this session on modern Indian history, my dear students, we are going to continue our series of discussions regarding important developments in subsequent Governor General's periods. We will see the major developments that took place during Lord Hastings' times and understand how that led to a more firm footing for East India Company's rule in India. So let's get started. Before we go to Lord Hastings, we have to just briefly take a note about some key developments during Sir George Barlow's period when he will be the Governor General of Bengal in India. George Barlow's period is from 1805 to 07. He was the Revenue Secretary of Cornwallis's period and is very strongly associated with the permanent settlement that was implemented during Lord Cornwallis' times. He played a crucial role in that, and later, as Governor General, he also established the Bank of Calcutta. The Bank of Calcutta, the first modern bank established during British times here in India. Bank of Calcutta later was rechristened as the Imperial Bank, and today it continues as our great State Bank of India. Incidentally, I had the honor of working briefly for State Bank of India as probationary officer. During his period, we also see the Vellore Mutiny of 1806. We just need to know about that the mutiny took place in 1806. What exactly happened in this mutiny? This is good 50 years before what was to happen later in revolt of 1857. And here also it was the insensitivity of the East India Company towards the beliefs and practices of Indian troops that led to this mutiny. There was a new dress code that was implemented during this period, a dress code that would, quote unquote, make Indian troops look more soldierly. Now, when East India Company earlier used to apply Indian troops, there was a lot of freedom to have, traditional kind of markers and dresses while serving with the company as well. But now that the company was, much strongly present in India, they wanted to have more military bearing in their soldiers. And for that reason, a new dress code was brought about, which prohibited Indian soldiers from bearing marks that they traditionally had based on customs and religion. Like for instance, Hindus were forbidden from having tilak and such other marks, whereas Muslim soldiers were told that they could not have beards. They had to shave their beards and also trim their mustaches. They were also made to wear a certain type of hat, which the English people used to wear, and especially converts from Indian religions to Christianity used to wear those hats. So this Indian soldiers suspected was a ploy to slowly change their religious beliefs, and naturally this was not taken very kindly by them. This was reason number one, dress code related issues. Second, Tipu Sultan's family, his sons, Tipu Sultan's wives, and also a large number of his retainers, they had been kept in the fort of Vellore. And it is said that some disrespect was also shown towards the family of Tipu Sultan, and consequently this led to a lot of anger in the troops. All of this led to a revolt or a mutiny on part of the soldiers of East India Company here in Vellore, which was ultimately suppressed in a matter of one day. The mutineers did not have strong leadership, and consequently East India Company's army was able to suppress that. So this is just one event that we need to know additionally, the Vellore mutiny, which precedes that of revolt of 1857. After this, we go on to the next major Governor General, that is Lord Hastings. Lord Hastings' period will be from 1813 to 23. Like Lord Warren Hastings, he too has enjoyed a very long tenure as Governor General here in India. Let us see now what will be the significant activities that will happen during his tenure. If Wellesley established military ascendancy in India, it is to the credit of Lord Hastings later, who will establish political sovereignty of the English over the whole of India. It will be during his period that the Marathas will finally be completely subdued to the British rule. And therefore, we can say that he has played a very crucial role in establishing of British paramountcy here in India. British paramountcy established thanks to Lord Hastings. When he takes over the control or reigns as Governor General, he has certain major objectives before him. What were these objectives? Number one was to suppress the lawlessness that the Pindaris were causing here in India. We're going to meet the Pindaris and see who exactly these people were and why they became a challenge to East India Company. Secondly, to destroy the independence of Maratha chiefs and make them accept company's supremacy. Although they had been humbled in the Second Anglo-Maratha War, but then they still had a very firm and strong footing in a greater part of Indian subcontinent. And consequently, they were always a threat for EIC because they had the power to bounce back. And EIC naturally looked at them with great suspicion. For that reason, Lord Hastings will want to, once and for all, finish off the Maratha challenge also. Thirdly, to bring under company's protection all other harmless states in India, harmless from EIC's perspective. These are the three strategic objectives that Lord Hastings had when he takes over as Governor General in India. Now, before I tell you how he will go about achieving those, a quick announcement for you guys and a very important one. We are today starting our new batch, our P2I batch. P2I batch, September evening batch is starting from today. It is available in English as well as Hindi medium and is targeted for 2024's attempt. Because of tremendous demand from students who could not enroll for the earlier batches, this new batch has been announced and it is starting today, my dear students, and this is your opportunity to make the most of this offering for you. This batch is a complete one-stop solution to all your preparation needs for civil services examination. Classroom teaching, study material, mentoring, hand-holding your entire journey, all of these features and a lot more are available in this one-stop solution batch for you. I strongly recommend that to give wings to your civil services dream, you enroll for this batch today itself by using my code JDLive. Use my code JDLive so that you get a huge discount on the fees. You don't pay 70,000, instead you pay just 30,000 about, and you can enroll for this batch and prepare for the civil services examination in a thorough, robust manner. I'll see you in the batch with subjects like modern India, among others. And in case you want to download my notes that I share during the course of these lectures, you can use this QR code, scan it, and reach my Telegram channel, Jawwad Kazi UPSC Preparation, and from there download my notes as well. All right, now let's get started and see what will be some of the significant developments during the time of Lord Hastings. The first major development that we must know about is Anglo-Nepal War of 1815 to 16. Okay. Now, as the English went about increasing their territory towards the north, the border of East India Company's territories reaches Gorakhpur in modern day Uttar Pradesh towards eastern UP bordering Nepal area today. So in 1801, Gorakhpur came under the rule of East India Company. This naturally brought them into close proximity, or rather having contiguous territory with Nepal, the territory of the Gurkhas. The Nepalis in this process during the late 18th century, they had also become a formidable power with multiple chiefs giving way to a single, compact, coherent Nepalese kingdom. This rising power of Nepal was brought into conflict with East India Company. Both the sides had disputes over some territories, especially the districts of Butwal and Shivraj. There were disputes over these two territories or these two districts, and this brought the East India Company into conflict with the powerful Nepalese kingdom. EIC also wanted to have access to Tibet for the sake of trade. Now, Tibet was very crucial because onwards from Western Tibet, you could also have access to Central Asia. East India Company in the 19th century will always be very fearful of an advancing Russian empire. And the Russians would come towards the crown jewel India via Central Asia. Tibet offered an alternate access to Central Asia because Afghanistan was challenging. Afghanistan was yet, not still in that comfort zone for Britishers to have as a buffer zone for them. Therefore, access to Tibet was crucial for these two reasons. Number one is, of course, trade, but also for access to Central Asia, alternate routes. In this war that will now be fought between East India Company and the Nepalese army, after successive battles, East India Company finally managed to defeat the Nepalese ruler, and after this defeat, they will sign a treaty by the name Treaty of Sagauli or Treaty of Sugauli. We come across both the spellings in different sources. Treaty of Sagauli will be signed in 1816. 1816 this will be signed. This area is Sugauli, is basically on the border of India and Nepal. According to this treaty, the Ranas of Nepal, they accepted their defeat and surrendered the areas of Garhwal and Kumaon to East India Company. Also, some part of Tarai region was surrendered to East India Company's rule. So, in this manner, a comprehensive defeat ensured that East India Company got these very crucial areas of Garhwal and Kumaon, and from this area, you could have an alternate access to go towards Tibet also. The Rana of Nepal after that did not object to access to Tibet from this region. British resident was now accepted at Kathmandu. Kathmandu, the capital, there British resident is accepted. And this is the same ploy that EIC has used with all Indian powers. The British resident was there, technically speaking, to aid and advise the ruler, but then for all practical purposes, he was actually trying to spy, ensuring that East India Company's interests were always upheld in those distant kingdoms. So British resident is accepted there. Nepal now permanently withdrew from Sikkim as well. Before this war, Sikkim had been under the control of the Nepalese ruler, and Sikkim had found this control to be very invasive, and consequently it had asked East India Company to get rid of it. Now Sikkim will become free of the control of the Nepalese ruler, and it will come under the influence of East India Company. So in that sense, this Anglo-Nepal war was a very significant one from the perspective of EIC and future developments regarding India. How did it help the East India Company? In immediate sense, it gave the Britishers the areas of Shimla, Mussoorie, where you basically want to go, Ranikhet and others. These are all summer capitals of the British. The British, being used to more cold climates, found it very difficult to survive the hot, humid climates of India during the months of April, May, June, and so very often they used to go to these summer capitals. Route for communication with remote region of Central Asia was now opened through the areas that were taken from Nepal. And very importantly, Britishers got hold of a very good resource for fighting their wars in future, the Gurkha soldiers. Britishers first-hand had experienced how good natural soldiers these Gurkhas were during the war. And even during the course of the war, they had started to enlist some of these Gurkha soldiers to fight against Nepal itself. And they fought brilliantly in all the campaigns. The Britishers were mighty impressed by the Gurkhas. And after this war, the Britishers will make Gurkhas a very significant part of their army. After the revolt of 1857 also, guys, when the concept of martial races will be implemented in the army, the Britishers will use certain races only for the sake of human resource in their army. Gurkhas were one of the martial race that they continue to induct soldiers from. And to this date, Gurkhas continue to serve in the British army. If you go to London and you visit the Buckingham Palace, there 24/7 there is a guard of Gurkha who is guarding that palace. Until recently, when the Queen was alive, it was like an honor that was given to the Gurkhas who had served the empire so loyally that the Gurkhas were constantly on the vigil guarding the Queen in her palace. Okay, so that's how valued the Gurkhas are for the British. Even now, Britishers, they recruit Gurkhas. People from Nepal can enlist in the East, they can enlist in the British army, and many of them have gone on to serve with distinction, risen to very good ranks, and also served in special forces like SAS, Special Air Service, SBS, Special Boat Service of the British. In India, of course, you know that we have a Gurkha regiment and we recruit Gurkhas into our army. So, start of all of that is here during Lord Hastings period. This, by the way, is an image of very early image of Gurkha soldiers in their traditional attire and weapons when they just started to serve the East India Company. All right, let's go ahead and let's see the next major development of this period, which is regarding the Pindaris. Now, who were these Pindaris? Pindaris were irregular soldiers who served different Maratha chiefs. The word Pindaris is derived from the term Pinda, which means a fermented drink which these people used to consume as a ritual. The Pindaris were both Hindus as well as Muslims, and their role during the campaigns of different wars where the Marathas were fought was not that of a regular soldier. They were not like paid, you can say, employees of Maratha armies. They formed loose auxiliaries. So whenever the Marathas were on a campaign, their role was to create chaos in the enemy's territory. And very often they resorted to loot and plunder in this process. They were very useful to ensure that the enemy lost his morale, because the Pindaris would go about in their areas, swarming their areas and creating a lot of ruckus, creating a lot of confusion, stopping their supply lines, and that gave a big advantage to Maratha forces, which then moved in with discipline. They appeared as irregular army attached to the Maratha chiefs' armies. But when the Marathas were defeated in the Second Anglo-Maratha War, the Marathas are defeated, and consequently now Marathas did not require the services of these Pindaris as much, because Marathas have been checked by the rise of East India Company, and consequently their activities are limited, and therefore the Pindaris naturally did not find the opportunity to serve under different Maratha chiefs. And consequently what happens is this immobilized population, which was in any case not regular employees earlier, also will resort to the means that they were using earlier, the same means, creating confusion, looting, plundering, so on and so forth. Around this time, there is a lot of confusion. This part of 18th century, 19th century India, still the Britishers have not firmly established their rule across the Indian subcontinent, especially the central plains. And consequently, there is complete political instability. The Mughal authority has virtually vanished. The East India Company has not completely taken over. The Marathas themselves also are not in a very good position. So this created a situation in which the Pindaris will rise up and they will create a lot of law and order related challenges. So much so that people started to lose faith in the state that East India Company was trying to establish. And therefore, Lord Hastings will take upon himself to suppress these Pindaris to establish law and order. With the help of troops of Sindhiyas, Lord Hastings will launch a massive campaign in 1817 to suppress the Pindaris, many of whom will be captured, killed, and many of them will also be incorporated into the British apparatus. And in this manner, the challenge of the Pindaris will be suppressed. Parallelly, when this action was going on against the Pindaris, the Maratha chiefs who had been suppressed or overcome in Second Anglo-Maratha War were also finding the influence of East India Company very, very inconvenient. The residents in the courts of Maratha chiefs were intrusive. They were interfering into the internal affairs of the Marathas, and therefore Maratha chiefs felt that one last effort needs to be made to get the control of East India Company away from them. This will lead to Third Anglo-Maratha War. The entire background, content, etc. has been discussed in a special lecture in this series. So you can watch that lecture to understand the details of it. At the end of this war, during Hastings times itself, Marathas will be defeated in this Third Anglo-Maratha War, leading to Treaty of Poona, by which Peshwaship will be abolished. The Peshwas of Marathas will be banished from Poona and they will be sent to Bithur near Kanpur, and there the Peshwa will be a pensioner of East India Company. Other Maratha Sardars had to accept British as their overlords, and each one had to become a subsidiary ally. So each one signed treaties and became subsidiary allies of the British. Separate treaties will be signed with Rajput states who earlier were under Maratha domination, and the Rajput states will now also come under the British East India Company's rule. So this is how Third Anglo-Maratha War will end. So guys, we saw the Anglo-Nepal War, we saw the issue of Pindaris during this period, and also we saw the context of Third Anglo-Maratha War briefly. Now let us see Hastings and his relations with Mughals. Before Lord Hastings, the relationship between Mughals and East India Company was, on paper at least, that of a superior and junior. Governor General used to address the emperor as Arzadasht. Arzadasht means a petitioner. Okay, petitioner. So it is like a more humble position that East India Company portrayed on paper for practical purposes. We knew that East India Company had all the power, but at least on paper, he was a petitioner to the Mughal ruler. Hastings did not want this, and he wanted to change the situation. The Mughal emperor also used to address the East India Company as his specially regarded servant. So you can see here from the nomenclatures, at least on paper, it seemed like a relationship between a superior and somebody who was junior. Lord Hastings, now a lot more confident with Maratha challenge subdued and largely whole of Indian subcontinent under his control, felt that this needs to be changed, and he sought a status of equality with the emperor. Now they will be at equal terms. However, company's coins continued to have stamp of emperor till 1835, and in 1835 even that will be ended. Henceforth, no more name of Mughal emperor will be etched on East India Company's coins. So this is how the relationship is going to transform during Hastings period. Now after this, we have to briefly see the development of revenue settlements during Warren Hastings times. So just let us have an overview regarding administrative measures taken during Warren Hastings period. Charles Metcalfe, who was the resident at Delhi. Resident at Delhi means at Red Fort, he was the representative of EIC. He was a resident at Delhi. He signed treaties with Rajput chiefs, and the Rajput chiefs will come under EIC now, unlike earlier when they were under Maratha Sardars. Thomas Munro will be made governor of Madras in 1820, and he will implement Ryotwari system over large areas of Madras. Ryotwari system, which we will see shortly after this. Elphinstone, another famous British officer, will be made governor of Bombay. Governor of Bombay, and during the same period, Marathas have been defeated, so the territories of Peshwa will get incorporated into Bombay. Areas of Peshwa will be under Bombay, and their Ryotwari system will be implemented. The same Ryotwari system as in Madras will be implemented in Bombay also during governorship of Lord Elphinstone. After this Mahalwari system, we'll have to see this shortly. This new type of system will be implemented in northwest of East India Company's possessions. Based on experience of permanent settlement, the new settlement evolved called as Ryotwari settlement, and based on experience of both permanent and Ryotwari, a new system called as Mahalwari system will be implemented in northwest. He also took a step that went back or took back the measure taken by Lord Cornwallis. Collector during Hastings' time was also given magisterial powers, the power of judge who can punish somebody, that is magisterial power. Collector earlier had been divested of judicial powers completely. By whom? By Lord Cornwallis. We have seen that in our earlier discussions. Lord Cornwallis had ended the system of collector having judicial powers also. But now for certain areas, magisterial powers were given to the collector, and today also you can see that collector additionally is also the district magistrate of that district. So he has magisterial powers even today. So it was Hastings who gave some of these magisterial powers. All right, now let us go into the Ryotwari system or settlement and try to understand this. A quick recap of Zamindari settlement is essential over here to relate with Ryotwari better. What had happened in Zamindari system or permanent settlement? In Zamindari system, East India Company had settled the revenue related thing with the Zamindar. Zamindar was declared as the owner of the land, and a certain assessment was agreed to between the two, that is EIC and the Zamindar, and the Zamindar had to pay revenue to East India Company according to that estimate perpetually. That was the system that was implemented in Bengal and some parts of northern Tamil Nadu also. Now that system was problematic because East India Company's income in that sense was fixed. If the Zamindar through his effort was able to increase cultivation and get more returns, then East India Company would not have a share in that. EIC's income was perpetually fixed at that same level. This mistake, or you can say this lacuna, was realized very soon, and therefore an alternate system was desired. In that context, in South India, a Ryotwari system will come about. What is this Ryotwari system? The word Ryotwari comes from the Persian word Rayat. Okay, Rayat is basically the peasant cultivator. The Britishers could not pronounce this, so they made it to Ryot. Ryot. And Ryotwari system is a system in which the state, East India Company state, directly settled a revenue with the individual farmer. That system is called as Ryotwari. In Zamindari, there is an intermediary between the state and the final cultivator, the Zamindar. The Zamindar collects rent from people, and out of the rent that he has got, he shares revenue with the state. That is the idea in Zamindari system. In case of Ryotwari, there is no such intermediary. The state is directly settling it with the cultivator. This was a brainchild of the officer Thomas Munro. Thomas Munro was a veteran of the Anglo-Mysore Wars. He had fought constantly with Tipu Sultan, and therefore in due course of fighting, he had understood the workings of revenue system of Tipu Sultan. In our previous lectures, I have told you that Tipu Sultan and the Mysorean state had implemented a system of military fiscalism. In this system of military fiscalism, the state used its army to remove all the intermediaries like the polygars and nayaks in between the state and the taxpayer. The intermediaries were removed. The taxpayer directly paid the revenue to the state. And because of that, the Mysorean state was able to realize much more revenue, and the farmer was also happier. This same system was sought to be implemented under Ryotwari system. Okay, so he is a veteran, Thomas Munro, of many wars in South India. On a side note, guys, just a small story here. He had fought against Tipu Sultan and fought shoulder to shoulder with Sir Arthur Wellesley, brother of Richard Wellesley, the Governor General. Arthur Wellesley was also fighting in India against the Mysorean state. And later on, Arthur Wellesley will go on to become Duke of Wellington and defeat Napoleon. Thomas Munro and Arthur Wellesley, they continued to be lifelong friends. Both of them had served in South India. Thomas Munro was particularly fond of South, and he could speak many of the languages spoken in South India very well. He served in India till 1805 or 7 something, and then after that went to London, came back again and became the governor of Madras. Because he had served there, he had experience, he knew the languages, and he was also very popular amongst Indian employees of East India Company. So a natural leader that he was made governor of Madras, and during his period, Ryotwari will be implemented everywhere. Okay. So initially, first experiments were in 1805 in parts of Madras. Later, when he becomes the governor of Madras, then it will be implemented everywhere in Madras. 1818, Bombay and Central India, after the defeat of Marathas, there also Ryotwari system will be implemented. Okay. In any case, Ryotwari was implemented in areas of Gujarat earlier. When Bombay Presidency expanded after the defeat of Marathas, when Peshwa areas were incorporated, then Bombay as a whole saw Ryotwari settlement. So towards the end, we can say that 51% area of British India was under Ryotwari settlement. Remember, I had told you 19% was under Zamindari or permanent settlement areas, 19%. And this is 51% of British India's areas. Why was this being implemented? Limitations of permanent settlement. What were the limitations? Number one, the Zamindar was an intermediary, and that intermediary was cornering away the revenue which would have otherwise come to the state. One. Number two, the amount was fixed. That is why it was called as permanent settlement. Permanent. That amount is fixed. Anything over and above that can be realized will belong to the Zamindar. So East India Company was missing out on that opportunity of future growth in revenue. So these reasons made EIC to rethink, and therefore they avoided any intermediary over here and collected revenue directly from the peasants, direct settlement. Okay. And in any case, in South India, there were, this lack of characters like zamindars, unlike in case of eastern part of India or northern India also, where the element of zamindar was quite strong. In southern India, that was not the case. Okay. The estimated revenue was 50% of the produce. So 50% the farmer gets to keep for himself, and 50% he is supposed to pay to the state. That was the kind of sharing that was implemented. This would last for 20 to 30 years, and after every 20 to 30 years, there will be a fresh assessment. So suppose when it starts in 1819, a farmer is paying 100 rupees. The amount is settled at 100 rupees. Total income of farmer is 200. So 50% of that, that is 100, goes to EIC, and another 100 that goes to the farmer. This system will continue for 20 to 30 years. After 20 to 30 years, there will be a reassessment, and EIC will try to find out whether this amount of 200 has increased or no. If it has become, say, 220, then in that case, sharing will be 110 respectively. Okay. So that the company does not lose out on this extra income that is now being generated, this settlement was to be revised every 20 to 30 years. Okay. Collection will be done directly by state officials of EIC. No intermediary in between. So I hope you got the concept of Ryotwari settlement. Now let us see what is the significance of Ryotwari. Ryotwari settlement, although sounded good on paper for Indians also. Why was it good? Because there was no intermediary, which means the farmer would benefit. But then practically that did not happen. Why? Because assessment of the EIC was very high. That 100 rupees that we were saying, that 100 rupees was already on the higher side. Practically, maybe the farmer was producing only 80 rupees. And the company is on its paper saying, no, 100 rupees can be generated from your land. So what will happen? Assessment is high and therefore the farmer will have to pay excess. Company is saying we are taking 50%, but practically speaking, the farmer has to pay out even more. And if he's not able to pay out, then the company resorted with harsh methods. Farmers could be flogged, their properties could be taken away, he could be kicked out of the land, anything could happen to him and his family. There was no reliefs also during droughts and famines. During these early years of British rule, the Britishers did not feel that they had any responsibility when it came to droughts and famines. If you remember that movie Lagan, again, I keep coming back to that movie because it does have some of these themes. In that movie, what is Bhuvan and other villagers requesting Rajaji about? They're asking remission because there has been no rain. How will a farmer pay revenue? But Captain Russell is not interested in giving any remission. Practically, that is what was the case here in Ryotwari settlement. Droughts or famines, farmer has to pay the revenue. Peasants naturally became poor because of this. What will the peasant do? He does not have anything. All he knows is farming. And back then, there were no other career opportunities. A farmer, traditionally, he was doing that same thing. The peasant was working on the field only. So he will have to sell whatever little gold, jewelry, whatever utensil he has, maybe some animals that he possesses. He'll have to sell off all of that. And in the process, he becomes poor. Now, devoid of capital, devoid of resources, he is not able to develop his farmland. Consequently, agriculture will see stagnation. Many famines will happen in India during this process. A common feature with zamindari settlement, here we also see introduction of money lender class in rural areas. Yes, money lending business had always been there. We know about Arthashastra talking about money lending class in India. There are many other references. But then this class was concentrated where? In urban areas. The intrusion of money lenders into the rural countryside will happen because of the opportunity created by this rural indebtedness. So now you can see even today, if you go to villages, any nook and corner of India, if you go to any village, you'll find at least one money lending family over there. That introduction has happened because of British policy. Transfer of land now became very common, churning of land. Land was now made a sellable commodity. You could buy and sell land like you can buy and sell any other thing, any other property. Traditionally in India, buying and selling of land like that was not possible because multiple layers of society had different rights on the land. Nobody had absolute ownership. But Britishers brought the concept of absolute ownership of land from England to India. And now it was possible to buy and sell lands. So in distress, often the farmer used to sell off his land to pay the revenue, to pay the interest of the money lender. Then comes the last major settlement that we must know about, which is Mahalwari settlement. We have seen permanent settlement, we have seen Ryotwari settlement, and now we are seeing Mahalwari settlement. This word Mahal in this context is a Hindi word which means village or estate. Village or estate. This village or estate became the unit for revenue assessment and payment. So what Britishers learned from the earlier two settlement was zamindari has problems because EIC is missing out on a big chunk of revenue. It is, surrendering all the future increase in production of land. So they went for Ryotwari. Problem with Ryotwari was, in Ryotwari, settlement was with every single farmer and it had to be done every 30 years. So that became a big administrative burden for EIC to carry out. So further refinement takes place in Mahalwari settlement. What EIC does in Mahalwari is, instead of settling with individual farmers, they settle directly with the village headman. The village headman, who in any case, was a powerful social elite in that community, he was the one made responsible for revenue realization of the entire mahal or village. Now he knows how many people, who has how many number of how much of land each farmer possesses, and based on that, the farmer, the village headman, the nambardar, he will calculate individual farmers' his revenue liability. He will collect revenue from all of these people and pay it to the state. So this was a win-win situation in both the cases for East India Company. They got best of the earlier two systems. They have stability now in terms of revenue. They know how much each mahal is going to pay. And at the same time, they don't have the administrative burden of dealing with every single farmer's assessment. All of that will be taken care of by the headman called as Nambardar. Also called as Lambardar in some cases. Both are the same entity, Nambardar or Lambardar. East India Company is getting stability and also ease. That is why Mahalwari system was implemented. Unlike permanent settlement, which was permanent forever, this system was also periodic, and revision would happen every 20-30 years for each mahal. And then within that mahal, the nambardar will allocate everybody's revenue liability. Okay. Revenue was 50% of the estimate. Like in case of Ryotwari settlement also, here as well, 50% will be paid as revenue. So whatever is being produced, 50% of that is the demand of the state. For 20 to 30 years, settlement is done, and then after that, revisions can be made. Regions where this was implemented, including Northwest frontier areas, not NWFP, but then till this point, East India Company has not yet taken over Punjab also. Okay, so it is very much your modern day Western Uttar Pradesh, Haryana, that area. Agra, Central Province, Gangetic Valley, and some parts of Punjab. Punjab as in below the river Satluj. Introduction of this was done by Holt Mackenzie. Permanent settlement, Lord Cornwallis, Sir John Shore, and Barlow are associated with that. In case of Ryotwari settlement, we have Thomas Munro and Elphinstone. Whereas Mahalwari settlement, the person associated with is Holt Mackenzie, and it was later reformed by Lord William Bentinck also. Lord William Bentinck also reformed this system. So these are the names of British officials that we must know. Consequence of this, consequences across all the settlements remain the same, guys. High revenue assessment, harsh methods of collection, impoverishing of the farming class in India, introduction of money lenders, debt trap, churning of land, all of these ideas are going to remain the same when it comes to the three revenue settlements. Indian farmer ultimately suffered that same decline because of the settlements. The experiments of Britishers varied, but it did not change the lot of the Indian farmers. It remained the same. So this is about the third and last type of settlement, that is Mahalwari settlement. After this, lastly, we will see the idea of commercialization of Indian agriculture under British influence. What do we mean by commercialization of agriculture? In India, traditionally, from ancient medieval times, agriculture was made more a way of life. It was a way of life. Britishers, through their economic control, changed this. For Indian farmers, agriculture was actually about subsistence. Farmer was primarily cultivating for himself, and the agricultural produce was basically used to keep the socio-economic system of the village going. Every village was largely self-sufficient in itself. There were systems like Jajmani and Balutedari system in different parts of India, wherein service castes provided their services and the farmers shared their produce with them. So the model that India had was that of self-sufficient villages. The farmers were producing basically for subsistence, for self-consumption, for themselves as well as for the local rural community. But when the British come about, they suddenly transform this. In a matter of few decades, we will see that farming in India will become commercialized. What do we mean by commercialization then? Instead of producing for subsistence, now the Indian farmer will be producing for markets nationally and internationally. This is the big transformation that will happen in Indian agriculture, from subsistence to selling in markets, both national as well as international. Okay. Britishers prioritize cash crops or commercial crops in India. Cotton, which was required for making cloth, making for the textile industry in Britain. Indigo, which was still the most important natural dye. Commercial dye had not been, chemical dye had not yet been invented. Indigo, jute, sugarcane, tobacco, all of these crops. Now, these are not crops that the rural community is going to consume as such. Okay, the rural community requires food crops, but British economic interests require such commercial crops more than food crops. And therefore, they force the Indian farmers to produce these crops. This forced process will transform the fabric of Indian farming. For this, Britishers often gave loan advances. British, through their, people who were planters, these planters used to give advances to the farmers so that, they could cultivate these commercial crops. Once the farmer accepted their loan, then he got trapped in a debt trap. The loans were advanced not to facilitate the cultivation. It was done to trap that farmer once and for all, so that he would remain, in this vicious cycle only. He would continuously cultivate only these crops. Furthermore, land was made as a private commodity. As we have noted earlier, during Cornwallis's time, absolute ownership of land became a legal concept in India. And because now land was a commodity, it could be bought and sold. Therefore, the farmer who is caught in debt trap ultimately would be compelled or forced to sell his land so that at least he will be out of the debt. It affected the food sufficiency of villages. Naturally, when villages were dedicated to cultivation of such crops, these villages will now not have sufficient food production for themselves. This affected the subsistence-based model of Indian rural economy. Many systems that had evolved in India, like Jajmani or Balutedari, in these systems, different castes who were not engaged in agriculture used to provide their services to the village and in return get a share in food production. But now the problem was that because of commercialization, the food production itself had gone down. Therefore, these traditional stabilizing structures in India, they got upset in this process. Very often, these crops that were forced, say for example, indigo and opium, they had a very negative effect on the productivity of the farmer's soil. Indigo particularly was well known amongst Indian farmers then also that it leads to a reduction in fertility of the soil. This naturally affected the farmer's economic well-being as well. After cultivating indigo, then he could not go on to cultivate other crops with the same productivity. Market-dependent agriculture led to impact of market volatilities also on the farmers. When the farmers were cultivating crops which were in great demand in Europe, and suddenly there was a slump because of it, it would affect the village economy also. Gone were the days when village economies were self-sufficient and isolated. They were not connected directly in terms of agriculture with the global economy. But now when the demands were affected in Europe, India's villages were also affected. A quick example on that, guys, can be seen during American Civil War. During the American Civil War, there was tremendous demand for cotton, but the Civil War condition prevented American cotton from reaching Britain. So during those few years, Indian cotton suddenly saw a boom, and Indian cotton was reaching European markets on a much bigger scale. But when the war in USA ended, there was a sudden slump again, and that affected the economic well-being of cotton farmers in Deccan. That led to the Deccan riots of 1875, which we will discuss later. But then you can see how integrated India's rural economy became to the global economy thanks to commercialization of agriculture. So these were interconnected aspects, guys. So I thought it was fitting to take them with the two different settlements that we just saw. I hope you understood the period of Lord Hastings, the wars that he fought, and also the settlements that were initiated around the same time. I'll see you in my next class, where we will go further into our discussion of modern Indian history. If you watched this video thus far, I'm sure you found some value in it. Do like this video, comment in the comment box below, and share it with your friends as well. I'll see you in my next class. Thank you.